Mr. Chairman and Committee. I am Kelly Miller, and I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, a statewide membership organization comprised of Idaho's 24 community and tribal domestic and sexual violence programs and 41 social justice, criminal justice, and other allied professional organizations. The Idaho Coalition enthusiastically supports House Bill 2 to include the language of sexual orientation and gender identity, extending protections from discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations, of which I will talk about. What we know is true is that if anyone's rights are diminished, all of our rights are diminished. We understand our profound interconnectedness as human beings to one another. We envision a world where all people have the ability to thrive and fulfill their real potential. We envision compassionate, peaceful communities rooted in respect, social equity, and absolute justice for all human beings, where discrimination and violence in our communities is no longer a common occurrence and no longer tolerated. What I want to talk to you today about is that there is a connection between discrimination and gender identity and gender violence. Gender violence is a broad umbrella term that encompasses what we typically use as legal definitions: domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, rape, stalking, teen dating violence. And what we know that these forms of gender violence disproportionately impact girls and women, transgender, and gender nonconforming people. Discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation is part of the continuum of gender oppression and gender discrimination. At the end of that continuum is the violence that we see in our communities, in our homes, and in our state: abuse and rape. Simply stated, discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation is rooted to the root cause of violence in our communities that we no longer want to accept or tolerate. And if we're going to end gender violence, if we're going to end domestic violence and sexual assault in our schools, in our communities, in our campuses, in our state, we need to begin by unrooting discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. There has been a lot of discussion around public accommodations. What I want you to know is that public accommodations are often the safety net in our communities. They include domestic and sexual violence shelters. They include a whole host of services: health care, medical services, counseling, that individuals who are impacted by violence need to have to begin to reduce the trauma, to survive from the trauma of abuse and rape, and have social and emotional well-being for themselves, their families, and their children. In any one day, we have over 550 individuals, families, and children seeking services from Idaho's domestic and sexual violence shelters. What I will tell you is that the shelters, and then all the whole host of services that are the safety net in our state, are vital, life-essential services, and these are public accommodations. Individuals who are gay and transgender, who have been impacted by any form of gender violence, should have access to these services and not be refused based on their identity or sexual orientation. We need to respond to everybody who's a victim of violence. And without House Bill 2, that can't happen in our state. Contrary to the testimony yesterday, there is a federal civil rights law that protects sexual orientation and gender identity. In 2013, United States Senator Mike Crapo was the lead co-sponsor of the Violence Against Women Act. This act is 20 years old. It has brought so much money and life-saving services to this state, and Senator Crapo has been a national leader. The 2013 amendments to the civil rights law included sexual orientation and gender identity. What we ask is that you follow Senator Mike Crapo's leadership, that you understand that everyone is entitled to protections, and we ask you to add the words in House Bill 2. Thank you very much.
Are there questions? Representative Wintrow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kelly, for that great explanation. I just have one question. Could you be a little more clear when you were talking about the root cause of gender violence, or the root cause of domestic violence, sexual assault, et cetera, is the same as the violence that is experienced or linked to gender-based violence, which would be about gender identity?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wintrow and committee, what we know from the research, and I've been doing this work for 30 years, is that when we look at domestic violence, sexual assault, and rape, and all of the gender crimes that impact disproportionately 85% or more girls and women, transgender and gender nonconforming people, that we know one of the root causes is gender inequality, or this idea that male heterosexual domination is the standard by which the hierarchy is established. That girls and women, transgender and gender nonconforming people are generally demeaned or seen less than the dominant culture. And so that is why we talk about this continuum, much in the same way when we think about rape at the end of the continuum of gender violence. It starts with a culture around sexist jokes, sexual harassment, and it moves down that continuum. So when we think about what we can do as a society, we have to really get down to those root causes. What can we do to change this culture of domination or oppression or discrimination? And so that's why it is so important when we think about gender identity and sexual orientation. Would you automatically think about that being connected to gender-based violence or gender violence? Probably not, but it absolutely is. And this is a step in the direction that protects all Idahoans, and we ask you to pass House Bill 2.
Further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also have written testimony if we could submit, Chairman.
Please leave it with us, and we'll see that it's part of the record.
Thank you.